right, good afternoon. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature organization, and we present the Iowa City Book Festival each year, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2024 festival, provided by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Iowa Arts Council, which exists within the Iowa Economic Development Authority. So today we are going to hear from Professor Anna Barker, who will present From Peter the Great to Napoleon the Lesser, Dostoevsky and the Great Men of History. Professor Barker teaches in the UI College of Liberal Arts and Sciences in the Russian program and in the UI Tippy College of Business Marketing program on topics ranging from Tolstoy to Barbie. Her current courses include Introduction to Russian Culture, Russian Literature in Translation, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and Hey Barbie, I Like Your Style and Substance, an Archetypal Genius of a Blockbuster. In 2021, in collaboration with the UI Library's Special Collections, Professor Barker curated the exhibition From Revolutionary to Outcast to a Man of God, Dostoevsky at 200. And since 2020, in partnership with our organization, her online tutorials examining the intersection of literature, history, and culture in classics such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, Paradise Lost, Madame Bovary, Les Miserables, War and Peace, and Brothers Karamazov reached more than 7,500 readers around the globe. Her monthly column, Anna's Thinking Cap, dedicated to Iowa, French, and Napoleonic past, is published in the Iowa City Press Citizen. Following Anna's talk, we will screen Taxi Driver, which is a film based on Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. So please help me welcome Anna Barker.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. Welcome to the Iowa City Book Festival, and I'm mic'd, right, so you can hear me. Wonderful. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm absolutely shocked to discover we have a full audience today, and if I was really goofy, I would ask you to raise your hands if you are here for Dostoevsky or for Napoleon, and some of you are here for both. So they're both very exciting guys. But this one is special. Before I begin my talk, I'm going to show you my copy of Crime and Punishment. I've taught it a few times. It's an interesting copy. I have no idea why those bookmarks are there at this point, but they're there. They're keeping the book together. Then Notes from Underground, those of you who are reading with me, is a book of 2 parts, and my copy actually fell apart into part 1 and part 2 at some point. So as John mentioned, I've always considered myself a talker, but when the Napoleon film came out in December, everyone was telling me how historically inaccurate it is, and I kept explaining that everything about Napoleon is historically inaccurate because he intended it to be that way. And so I finally poured my thoughts on Napoleon into a film review. It was published last December, and the rest is history. I've been publishing a Napoleon-related article every month. So this talk is based on my September article, which is entitled From Peter the Great to Napoleon the Lesser, Dostoevsky and the Great Men of History. And I'm just going to actually add visual content to my article. I printed it out, and so I'm going to read every section of the article. We'll discuss how all that relates to the images that I want to show you, and then hopefully in about 30 minutes I will take as many questions as possible, and then we will screen Taxi Driver. We'll start at about 6. It's 2 hours, and I will do a Q&A session after the film as well. It's a dreadfully inaccurate adaptation of Notes from Underground, but controversy is always welcome in discussions about Dostoevsky. So, and I have a clicker, yay. So in the summer of 2021, during my final preparations for the Dostoevsky at 200 exhibition at the University of Iowa Main Library, and this exhibition was super fun, so we had absolutely amazing attendance, and working on it was the joy of my life. With a slight easing of COVID-related travel restrictions, I was invited to attend Dostoevsky bicentennial celebrations in St. Petersburg, Russia. This was one of the posters for one of the Dostoevsky celebrations, which was absolutely so much fun. So there's Dostoevsky strolling along one of the canals in St. Petersburg. The limited number of flights necessitated a layover in Frankfurt, Germany. Instead of remaining in the stifling airport building, I ventured into the city, had a beer, and there's me having a beer in Frankfurt. And I was completely all alone. It was the eeriest experience ever. Having a beer all alone in Germany is frightening. And I did take off my mask while drinking the beer, so there. And that puppy who is next to me, he's Watson. He's my literary travel companion. So I had a beer, walked along the Main River, and strolled past the birthplace of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the creator of the titanic character of Mephistopheles, who inspired Dostoevsky's most terrifying character, the Grand Inquisitor in Brothers Karamazov. The museum was closed, but soaking up Dostoevsky-related inspiration before visiting St. Petersburg was exhilarating and anticipatory. I was at my gate on time. And this is what I encountered at the Frankfurt airport. It's Goethe with a COVID mask on. Of course, it was amusing because people around Goethe in the COVID mask were eating and drinking without masks. So fascinating times. And of course, it's based on this painting by Tischbaum showing Goethe on the outskirts of Rome with all kinds of very important Goethe-related Rome attractions, such as the tomb of Cecilia Metella and the frieze of Iphigenia. It's fascinating that, speaking of great man of history, well, Goethe was a great man of history, but he also met the great man of history. Or celebration was the culminating point of my research. I gave the Lufthansa representative my passport and all the Dostoevsky-related information with contact numbers and addresses. She returned shortly, looking slightly bemused. "I don't know who this Dostoevsky is," she said, "but they told me to put you on the next flight." And so, because of this delay in Frankfurt, I ended up getting to the Pushkin estate at Mikhailovskaya at dawn. To say that you arrived in northern Russia at dawn in July is saying nothing, because there is really no dawn. So this is the view that greeted me as I was approaching Mikhailovskaya, which is Pushkin's estate. I needed to visit Goethe's house in Frankfurt for inspiration, because he had such a huge impact on Dostoevsky. And Pushkin was so important for Dostoevsky that his first work, White Nights, his first work, actually, Poor Folk, is an entire homage to the writing of Pushkin. He has an epigraph to his novel Demons taken from Pushkin. Pushkin is the most important literary inspiration for Dostoevsky always. So I saw this beautiful, endless dawn. And then I saw the grove where Pushkin wrote his lyrical poetry. And then I saw Pushkin's desk where he wrote Eugene Onegin and Boris Godunov. And please note, above his desk, there's a portrait of Lord Byron, huge fan of Napoleon as well. And on the mantelpiece, there is a tiny statue of Napoleon Bonaparte, which was immortalized in one of the lines in Eugene Onegin. He calls it his little Napoleon, the cylinder statue. He doesn't even mention Napoleon. So Napoleon is everywhere among these guys. Despite the severely pared down schedule, and I finally end up in St. Petersburg after this, right? Despite the severely pared down schedule, a whirlwind of activities took place to celebrate the bicentennial of Dostoevsky. Most of the events were moved outdoors, with readings at Dostoevsky's grave at the Tikhvinskaya cemetery of the Alexander Nevsky Monastery. So here's his grave. And the yellow flowers were from me. Those of you who are reading Crime and Punishment with me, yellow is a very important color in Crime and Punishment. So I just thought, Fyodor will like yellow flowers at his gravesite. So the yellow flowers were mine. And then this lovely young man who was dressed like Dostoevsky read from his works at the cemetery. And then I took a picture with him. And looking at this picture, I actually burst out laughing, because I realized that it was very hard for both of us to keep a straight face when we were taking this picture, because it's a very goofy experience to be talking to a Dostoevsky in person where he is buried. Dostoevsky would have been thoroughly bemused by this whole situation. And then, of course, Dostoevsky has very illustrious neighbors at the cemetery at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery, such as Tchaikovsky, Glinka, Mussorgsky, all of the great writers, composers of the time period are buried there as well. So some of the celebrations of Dostoevsky were musical performances at the graves of the composers. So arias from Glinka operas at the Glinka grave, and quartets at the graves of Tchaikovsky and Mussorgsky. It was an amazing way to celebrate Dostoevsky, to hear the music of his contemporaries that he appreciated and loved in the cemetery, because there's fresh air. And in the middle of COVID, that was a good thing. All right. So a play dedicated to the literary characters of Dostoevsky was staged in the courtyard of the Mikhailovsky Castle, where he spent his military engineering student years. And that is the rehearsal for the play. All of his literary characters at one point appeared in this whirlwind performance of all of his amazing works. And this happens to be the rehearsal of the novella that he wrote before Siberia, The Double. So you see the doubling of Galyatkin on the stage, and the man in the kind of taupe jacket, taupe coat, who's walking off the stage right now. That's the Dostoevsky actor in the play, and he's based on that portrait that you saw at the very beginning of my presentation. Several walking tours retracting the steps of the Crime and Punishment character started at the Haymarket, and a similar tour concentrated on key locations from Dostoevsky's The Idiot. So I walked past the house where he wrote Crime and Punishment, and past the house where Raskolnikov lives in Crime and Punishment. And the inscription on this plaque is remarkable. I'm just going to give a loose translation from the Russian. The tragic fates of the people of this neighborhood of St. Petersburg served to Dostoevsky as the foundation of his passionate sermon about goodness for all humanity. Just your standard plaque, nothing to see here. It's absolutely remarkable. So you can retrace all of Raskolnikov's steps in this neighborhood of St. Petersburg. And this is one of the canals that features prominently both in Crime and Punishment and in The Idiot. It was a citywide outdoor festival dedicated to Dostoevsky. And sadly, this was the celebration 2 years prior to COVID. So I was expecting something like this, Dostoevsky characters just walking around the entire neighborhood of St. Petersburg, and street plays occurring, kind of pop-up events occurring everywhere in the neighborhoods where Dostoevsky lived and where his characters roamed. Well, sadly, that was not the case this time. But still, it was pretty amazing. This was a citywide outdoor festival dedicated to the author, whose revelatory novels were created in the aftermath of a catastrophic event, 4 years spent as a hard labor convict in a Siberian prison camp. Dostoevsky was arrested for reading the wrong books, a point that always stirs my students out of a passive contemplation of 19th century tomes at the age of 28. The year was 1849. Revolutionary agitation was sweeping through Europe, from Poland to Italy and Paris to Budapest, and the Russian imperial authorities did their best to prevent similar unrest in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The house where Dostoevsky lived at the time of his arrest, and there is a plaque on it as well. The house where Dostoevsky lived at the time of his arrest was a 2-minute walk from the statue of the Bronze Horseman, the massive and imposing homage of Catherine the Great, the German princess who became Russia's most effective ruler, to her Romanov predecessor, Peter the Great. Rearing over a massive hunk of granite, the largest single stone ever altered by human hand, the French sculptor Etienne Falconet portrayed the founder of the city riding the physical wave of the stone and the virtual wave of history towards the Neva River, which, through the Gulf of Finland, connected Russia to the world of global commerce. The statue, immortalized by Dostoevsky's literary predecessor, Alexander Pushkin, in his poem The Bronze Horseman, which gave the statue its nickname, has since become the symbol of St. Petersburg. In the poem, the main character, Yevgeny, after a string of personal misfortunes, including the drowning of his sweetheart in the horrible flood of 1824, in a state of frenzied bewilderment, shakes his fist at the statue of Peter, which he designates as a source of all of his misfortunes. At this point, I need to pause because there was a sneeze in the audience. It's a Russian superstition. Whatever was told before sneeze, it's the absolute truth. So thank you. It really makes my classes super fun because every time a student sneezes, we just have a confirmation of truth being spoken. So Yevgeny just walks around the city. He loses his mind because he lost his sweetheart. The flood was devastating. And he comes over to Peter, and he shakes his fist at Peter the Great. Great man of history, tiny human being. What can we do about the great man of history? but just shake our fist at them. The underground man will stick out his tongue. You have no idea how many students have sent me photos of themselves when they were in St. Petersburg, shaking their fist at the Bronze Horseman. So reenacting literary books is what, or literary masterpieces, makes Anna very happy. The poem was one of Dostoevsky's favorites, and there's me, was Watson, by the statue. This is the difference between professional photography and fun times had by all. And of course, Pushkin was the greatest inspiration for Dostoevsky, always. And this is an illustration to the Bronze Horseman. So Yevgeny comes to the statue of Peter the Great, a great man of history, shakes his fist at him, blames him for all of his personal misfortunes, at which point the statue of the Bronze Horseman dislodges from its pedestal and chases Yevgeny through the streets of St. Petersburg through the night. It's a fantastic, macabre poem. Read it with my students in Intro to Russian Culture every time I teach it. The poem was one of Dostoevsky's favorites and may have been on his mind as he was arrested a stone throw away from the statue, escorted to the Peter and Paul Fortress, another St. Petersburg landmark, and sentenced to death by firing squad. A harsh indictment indeed for reading subversive anti-establishment literature, which was Dostoevsky's equivalent of Yevgeny's shaking fist. The sentence was commuted to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia. By the way, that is a standard issue Siberian convict outfit: warm pants, warm top, shackles around your ankles at all times, 24/7, even during bath time. They were removed only 4 years later when he was done with his sentence. Do you know why the red diamond on the back? Easy target for when they are running away. It's catastrophic. The sentence was commuted to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia, where Dostoevsky had plenty of time to contemplate the effect of the powerful of this world on the mere mortals, subsiding on the receiving end of events they cannot anticipate or control. Characters such as Raskolnikov and Myshkin burst out of the hell of Dostoevsky's severe punishment, while lone sufferers like himself, struggling to find meaning in the soulless atmosphere of a menacing metropolis that played such an outrageous trick on the young and aspiring writer. After 4 years of ankle-shackled barrack life near Omsk, and this is a picture of Russian convicts arriving to the halfway point between Europe and Asia. So that pillar marked where you leave Europe behind and enter Asia in the Ural Mountains. And this painting is by Saklevitan, good friend of Chekhov, and the title of this painting is Vladimirka. This was the main road that convicts took on their way to Siberian labor camps. And this is where the city of the Omsk province is today. So this is the province where Dostoevsky was serving his hard labor sentence. After 4 years of ankle-shackled barrack life near Omsk, east of the Ural Mountains, and 6 additional years of military service at the labor camp in Semipalatinsk, which is in today's Kazakhstan, and this is the house where Dostoevsky lived in today's Kazakhstan, which was a part of the Russian Empire at that point. A stunning fall from grace for a college graduate, commissioned officer, and published author, Dostoevsky was allowed to return to European Russia. He remained under police surveillance for the rest of his life. Literary trends and revolutionary ideas have moved on from the classical liberalism which dominated the Russian progressive thought of the 1840s, and that's what Dostoevsky was in the late 1840s, a classical liberal, starting to lean towards radicalism just slightly towards the end of 1848 because of the revolutionary activities that were happening all over Europe that year. So this Russian progressive thought of the 1840s have moved on to the 1860s and 1870s anarcho-radicalism of people like Mikhail Bakunin and eventually of people like Sergei Nechayev, author of the 1869 Catechism of a Revolutionary, a writer who inspired Dostoevsky's most consequential character in Demons, Pyotr Verkhovensky. The first slender tome that attempted to distill the wisdom Dostoevsky acquired during his years of exile and tried to encompass his evolution, his evolving worldview, was the 1864 Notes from Underground, whose 160th birthday we are celebrating this year. A literary and philosophical response to both Turgenev and his father's, oops, sorry, that's the demon. So this is Sergei Nechayev, who inspired the character of Verkhovensky in Demons. Notes from Underground was both a literary and philosophical response to Turgenev's Fathers and Sons and Chernyshevsky, What is to be Done. Notes from Underground bewilders the readers with the counterintuitive conclusions of its nameless hero, who is determined and he will choose to be unhappy. That is Dostoevsky's conclusion. Counterintuitive, but why cloak the visceral impulses of our basic human wantings with rationalizing straitjackets? Maybe man does not love well-being only. Maybe he loves suffering just as much. Maybe suffering is just as profitable for him as well-being, says Dostoevsky. For man sometimes loves suffering terribly much, to the point of passion. That's a fact. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky began his contemplations on the consequences of the actions of the so-called you lost. Is it still on? Mic on? Okay. Great man of history, from Peter the Great to Napoleon Bonaparte, who is referenced continually in Crime and Punishment, the intellectual sequel of Notes from Underground. Justifying the unjustifiable is the prerogative of the great men of history, who, despite their multiplying crimes they commit, employ the greater good defense in order to avoid self-scrutiny. Dostoevsky irreverently mocks both Napoleons, the great Napoleon and the lesser Napoleon. So Napoleon I of the First French Empire and Napoleon III of the Second French Empire. Dostoevsky irreverently mocks both Napoleons in Notes from Underground, since Russia was just emerging out of the 1850s confrontation with Napoleon III of the Second French Empire, whom Victor Hugo eviscerated in his scathing essay entitled Napoleon the Lesser. So the revolution of 1848 in Paris did result in the establishment of a republic, which was such a tremendous inspiration for everyone in Europe. But then Napoleon the Lesser, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, the first, established the Second Empire. And Victor Hugo, who believed in republics, was so disgusted that he wrote an essay entitled Napoleon the Lesser. You can just imagine how Napoleon III related to this, which landed the author in the same position as Dostoevsky in 1849, under the threat of arrest and imprisonment. Victor Hugo managed to escape France with a counterfeit passport and spent the next 18 years in exile, which was terminated only after the catastrophic fall of Napoleon III in 1870. Yes, reading and writing banned books was fraught with severe consequences in the 19th century. So what was Victor Hugo's big, whopping, shaking fist at Napoleon the Lesser? Les Miserables. If you can't counter the powers that be, you do what you can. And he wrote a book in exile, which was published, and it was so stupendously significant in the historical and literary pantheon of France that Napoleon could not ban it. So who won that fight? Victor Hugo. The seemingly counterintuitive musings of the underground man the seemingly counterintuitive musings of the underground man who refuses to imitate. Can you hear me? Let me start again. Okay, this is third time's the charm. The seemingly counterintuitive musings of the underground man who refuses to imitate the powerful of this world by creating self-justifying narratives evolve into the erratic soliloquies of Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, who is yearning with every ounce of his rational being to become one of the great men, despite his awareness of their abject criminality. Quote, all, not only great men, but even those who are a tiny bit off the beaten track, that is, who are tiny bit capable of saying something new, by their very nature cannot fail to be criminals, more or less, to be sure, says Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov connects the permissiveness of evil in the powers that be to the actions of Napoleon I, who, by the end of the scathing indictment presented in the following passage, becomes associated with a man of bronze. The bronze horseman, whom Pushkin's Yevgeny can only counter with the shaking of the fist. No, those people are made differently. The true master to whom all is permitted, Saxe-Toulon, makes that one. Saxe-Toulon makes a slaughterhouse of Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, expands 500,000 men in a Moscow campaign, gets off with a quip at Vilna. And when he dies, they set up monuments to him, and thus everything is permitted. No, obviously, such men are made not of flesh, but of bronze. And it's fascinating that at the end of Notes from Underground, the underground man is musing that someday human beings will fail to be born of human fathers and somehow will be born out of an idea. And that is the thought that terrifies Dostoevsky the most. Raskolnikov is the best example he creates of a man born out of an idea. The great man justification for permissiveness of evil, rationalized as a means of achieving the greater good, devastated several Dostoevsky characters trapped in the paradigm of wanting to achieve greatness, but unwilling to step over their own humanity to validate their urge for recognition. Bronze Horseman and, of course, Brothers Karamazov. He got terribly carried away with Napoleon. That is, essentially, what carried him away was that a great many men of genius disregarded isolated evil and stepped over it without hesitation. And so I'll just go back to Crime and Punishment. If you take the title of Crime and Punishment in Russian, «Преступление и наказание», and add one vowel to the word «преступление», crime, it becomes «переступление», which is stepping over. And that is a very important part of Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov's name comes from the Russian word raskol, which means splitting apart or schism. Raskolnikov is a schismatic in the sense that he cannot come to terms with the fact that he wants to achieve greatness by stepping over his own humanity. And he cannot fully step over his humanity and become a man of bronze, the kind of man who disregards pangs of conscience in order to achieve greatness. So this is the quote from Crime and Punishment. I'll read it again. He got terribly carried away with Napoleon. That is, essentially, what carried him away was that a great many men of genius disregarded isolated evil and stepped over it without hesitation. Committing evil without hesitation and creating rational justification for such acts was the fate reserved for the darkest of Dostoevsky characters, a feeble old man perpetuating his power but by depriving his victims not only of their freedom but of their free will. And this is, of course, the Fritz Eichenberg illustration to Brothers Karamazov, the most important chapter in Brothers Karamazov and all of Dostoevsky, called The Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor, inspired by both the writing of Goethe and, of course, Friedrich Schiller, and burst in the feverish mind of Ivan Karamazov, is the culmination of Dostoevsky's contemplation on the corrosive nature of power. The great men of history, just like the Grand Inquisitor, may impose their power, but their rule is temporal and cannot withstand the counterbalancing presence of free will, which, by endowing human beings with the burden of choice, serves as a guarantor of their freedom. Dostoevsky paid with his own freedom for this conclusion, foreshadowing in near prophetic ways the grotesque infringements on human freedom in the 20th and 21st centuries. Thank you. All right, that's it. So yes, sorry about the mic. It keeps falling off. Well, I told you it'll be 25 minutes, and so I would love to engage everyone in discussion because as you can tell, I can talk about both Dostoevsky and Napoleon for days, if not weeks, months. So any and all questions would be welcome. But Notes from Underground is a very, very special book. I mean, I can't imagine. The first 40 pages of Notes from Underground is the greatest distillation of Dostoevsky's post-Siberian philosophy. And in my commentary on Substack, I actually pointed out every single instance where he mentions something, and then he will work with that idea for the rest of his writing career. So he died in 1881. And Notes from Underground was published in 1864. Crime and Punishment comes in 1866. So about 15, 16 years to create the rest of his great works. And the foundation of that is Notes from Underground. After that comes Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, Adolescent, and Brothers Karamazov as the final penultimate novel, or ultimate novel. Well, was supposed to be not the last novel. He did not know that he was going to die at 60. So Brothers Karamazov was supposed to have 2 sequels. And it was supposed to be a novel about the life of a great sinner. If you are planning a big, big novel like that, and you die before you get to complete it, just completing part 1, which was Brothers Karamazov, was an amazing way to end a writing career, because all of those issues that he poses in the first 40 pages of Notes from Underground, they actually are resolved in Brothers Karamazov. So a lot of readers ask me, so should I just read the last page of Brothers Karamazov and get the suffering over with? And I counter with a quote from Notes from Underground where Dostoevsky says, well, what do you prefer? Cheap happiness or lofty suffering? You decide. And then my students often ask me, Anna, can we have like lofty happiness? And I'm like, not an option. So it's either cheap happiness or lofty suffering. Humans, take it or leave it. Yes, any questions, comments? Yes.
We're live streaming, so we want you to use the microphone.
Yeah, it's been about 10 years since I've read him and also Tolstoy, although I read War and Peace again last year, I think. But anyway, Tolstoy seems to kind of counter the great man of history.
Absolutely.
And does Dostoevsky give me a quick notes version, does he?
Well, the amazing thing is, so my class on Tolstoy and Dostoevsky called Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, but the Steiner book about the two of them is entitled Tolstoy or Dostoevsky for a reason, because the main concepts of the two writers are incompatible. So if I can give you a very quick summary of what Dostoevsky and Tolstoy say about the nature of humanity, Tolstoy says, well, we are terrible, but we must strive to improve. And he spent his entire life trying to improve just himself, causing tremendous suffering for everyone around him because of his striving to improve himself, especially his family and his wife Sonia. Dostoevsky says, we are terrible, and that's the best thing about us, because that presupposes that we have a sense of our own limitations and our own humility. As soon as we abandon the idea that we are perhaps not divine, we become capable of living in an imperfect world. And since a perfect world is an impossibility, and Dostoevsky is terrified of the creation of a perfect world, I think I have the image here, he went to London during his tour of Europe, and he saw the Crystal Palace, which is the creation of Joseph Paxton for the World Exhibition that was housed in London in the mid-19th century. And when Dostoevsky saw this marvel that was made of glass, it was a glass palace, they called it, the Crystal Palace. And he has the underground man raving in Notes from Underground against the Crystal Palace, because for Dostoevsky, this faith in progress that human beings have was very similar to the concept of the Tower of Babel. I mean, these people had everything figured out, and they were so cool, and they were so advanced in their knowledge of everything that they decided to build a tower to elevate themselves above their own humanity. And Dostoevsky is terrified that humanity will reach potentially a moment where enough people will believe that they are elevated above their own humanity, because once they are, permissiveness of evil becomes so widespread that they are going to kill everyone in order to achieve this perfection. If you are looking at this statement through the prism of the 20th century, you are absolutely befuddled at how Dostoevsky could predict the horrors that will be done for the greater good of humanity, perpetuated by people who will lose connection with their own self-consciousness and with their own sense of proportion and humanity. So being born out of an idea is the most terrifying concept that Dostoevsky had to deal with. And of course, Tolstoy in War and Peace, he debunks Napoleon. That is a really, really good novel about how to destroy a historical character in 1,300 pages. It's a master plan. Those of you who are writers, if you need to figure out how to destroy a great man of history, read War and Peace. It's a how-to book on how to destroy a great man of history. And Tolstoy doesn't just do it halfway. He actually brings Napoleon to the height of his glory at the Battle of Austerlitz, where he wins his greatest battle in 1805. And one of the characters in the book actually wants to emulate Napoleon, even as he is fighting Napoleon from the Russian side. But then Tolstoy takes another 3 volumes to destroy this person. So he didn't start the novel in 1810. He didn't start the novel in 1808. He starts the novel in 1805 for a reason. He wants to take Napoleon from the height of his glory into the gutter and leaving Russia and getting off with a quip in Vilna. I actually visited Vilnius this summer because I wanted to see the palace where Napoleon stayed both before and after the Russian campaign. It's a fascinating place, absolutely fascinating. They still remember him there. So yes, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy have very different approaches to human nature, but Dostoevsky felt that we have free will for a reason. It's our curse, but it's also our salvation. Because of free will, we make terrible choices, but that's the best thing about human beings. As long as we don't start self-justifying our terrible choices, because we have the ability to do so, we are rational human beings, so self-justifying terrible choices is where humanity goes terribly wrong. And this is one of those examples. I'm actually using the Tower of Babel as the main image, and this is the Bruegel painting that is housed in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. I'm using it as the main image for my crime and punishment tutorial.
Thank you so much for this talk. And I love the idea of people, I mean, I hate the idea of people being born from ideas. It's terrifying, but it's a beautiful way of putting it.
But we love doing it because it's so simple.
It's so simple, yes.
It's so much more simple to be born from an idea than to deal with being a human being.
And I guess that kind of, so my question, and it kind of bounces off the previous question. When I think about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, when I think about Tolstoy's reputation in the West, going back to the 19th century, Tolstoy seems very amenable to the sort of optimism of liberal Western Europe. And Dostoevsky, it seems he kind of emerges in the English language, kind of in the early 20th century, modernists, post-World War I, a lot more pessimism. And I guess I'm wondering if you could just talk a little more about, because it seems to me that Dostoevsky nevertheless has this sort of belief in free will that isn't progressive. And as a Westerner, it's very hard for me to wrap my mind around Dostoevsky. I feel like I get Tolstoy, and I don't get Dostoevsky. Could you say something about the Russian reception and reputation of Dostoevsky?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Fabulous question. So, Tolstoy was a hereditary count who renounced his privilege. He actually wrote about renouncing privilege in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and who was excommunicated by the Russian Orthodox Church for his very unorthodox Christian beliefs. He didn't believe in the Trinity. He didn't believe in the Eucharist. And he raved against the excesses of the church. I mean, his novel Resurrection has an entire scene where he mocks Holy Communion. And so the church has had enough of him, and as a consequence, made a martyr out of him. Young people were flocking by the thousands to worship at the shrine. They started having these Tolstoyan communes to emulate his style of life. And when they would actually visit him and realize that, oh, yes, he was still living on his hereditary estate that used to be powered by serfs until 1861, they would get disgusted with him. So the hypocrisy of Tolstoy is so glaring, but just look at what happens to him in the 20th century. Oh, yes, he was a hereditary count who was excommunicated by the church. He was the greatest hero in the Soviet Union. because he was everything that the Soviet literary analysis wanted from literature. He was socially conscious critic who denounced privilege, and he didn't embrace atheism, but definitely the excommunication from the church was a huge plus. Dostoevsky, on the other hand, I mean, his novel Demons was published in collected works, but not encouraged, because his novel Demons is a how-to of a revolution and the disastrous consequences thereof. I mean, the kids who start arriving in their stylish European clothes and stylish European ideas come from the First International. They are friends of Marx and Bakunin. And so they wreak havoc on this little tiny town where everyone is so receptive to the ideas because they are beautifully packaged. Was Dostoevsky? Yes, it was Virginia Woolf and James Joyce who started bringing Dostoevsky into the forefront. Constance Garnett deserves a statue in every location where Russian literature is read. She translated 80 volumes of Russian literature, but her rendition of Dostoevsky is just so inadequate at this point because she didn't understand just how revolutionary his ideas were. So I'm a huge fan of Pevere and Volokhovsky. You can throw your eggs. If you have any rotten eggs and tomatoes in the audience right now, this is the time to deploy because there's this controversial reputation of those two. But I feel that they translated Dostoevsky into English in a way that preserves the idiosyncrasies of his language. So he doesn't write in Russian. He writes in Russians. Every character speaks a different register of Russian language, and they're so individualized. Bakhtin, when he wrote about Dostoevsky's poetics, he called it his heteroglossia. Every character speaks a different voice. And Dostoevsky, this is what happens. Students tell me Dostoevsky is an existentialist. And I'm like, no, he's not. And they keep arguing about me. Once I even brought my pink boxing gloves. And I said that anyone who says Dostoevsky is an existentialist can meet me in the corridor. You know, pink boxing gloves at dawn. So many novels I teach contain duels. It's just not even funny. But Dostoevsky, he understands that human beings are going to be seduced by what is simple, thinking that it is in their interest to choose what works. And human beings then will rationalize these decisions by saying that it was actually the right thing to do. And he fears that our ability to rationalize evil is so pronounced. We can't admit that we are wrong. We never can say, I'm sorry. Instead of saying, I am sorry, that's the plot of Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov has a very hard time with what he did. He did it because of an idea. And so he will vacillate for 400 pages of the novel between his desire to become the great man of history and get recognition for his ability to overstep his own humanity and to overstep his inhibitions towards the destruction of human life. But also, his other thought is, well, I did a great deed because I got rid of a louse. He actually calls the pawnbroker a louse. And with the proceeds that I received from this great deed, I can help 100 human beings. And that is the argument, 100 worthy human beings. And that is the argument that Dostoevsky will make in every novel. Who is going to determine who are the worthy 100 human beings who are going to be on the receiving end of a great and terrible deed? That's the summary of the 20th century. And so for me, the fact that Dostoevsky could see with such clarity what we are hurling towards is not a sign of his prophetic clairvoyance. It's a sign of his humanity. I mean, he lived with people who murdered and would told him in gruesome detail, nonchalantly, about all of the horrible deeds that they committed. For them, there was, bragging rights in just the horror of murder that they committed. Sometimes he couldn't take notes, but then he was an epileptic, and so whenever he had an epilepsy attack in Siberia, he would be taken to the prison hospital, and that's where he would sometimes take notes. And the hospital doctor went into a great deal of personal responsibility to keep the notes for Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky would be interrogated, and he would be asked, "Are you writing now?" "Yes." "What are you writing?" "My next great book." "Where is it?" "It's in my head." And so, but he did take notes, and he loved the language that the prisoners were using. It was colorful, it was irreverent. Russian swearing is an art form. I don't know how to do it, but when I hear it, I appreciate the great art of it. Dostoevsky noted all that down. That's why his character speaks so authentically, because he met with authenticity in the place where the only thing that you have is authenticity, which is 4 years of hard labor service in Siberia. So that's my very long answer. Dostoevsky is so hard to agree with. You just want to stand there and stomp your feet and stick out your tongue the way the underground man loves to stick out his tongue at the Crystal Palace, you know, at the perfection and rationality and progressive reasonableness of it all, because rational things are just so pleasant. They explain everything. And Dostoevsky says, but then there is that thing called free will. And note that all of his greatest characters are the most flawed characters in history. I mean, Mitya Karamazov is a terrible person, but we love him because he is so incredibly human and flawed to the core of his being. Grushenka is a terrible person, but we adore her. I love her statement, tomorrow, the convent, but tonight, we dance. That's my motto in life. Any other questions? We have about 10, 15 minutes. Yes?
Couldn't it be said that Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is his initial interpretation and rejection of the Enlightenment?
Oh, of course.
Because he could point to Robespierre, who initiated the Reign of Terror, and say, see, I told you so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and it's fascinating how Dostoevsky is writing before the revolution of 1917. So students say, like, was he clairvoyant? No. He lived through 4 French revolutions. So the first one is 1789. That's the Robespierre thingy. So first it went pretty well, and then it descended into the Reign of Terror, where, I mean, Robespierre was presiding over the Committee of Public Safety, and I always tell my students, are you for or against public safety? We are for public safety. Well, there you have it. As long as you clad an impossible ideology in perfect rational terms, give the perfect narrative for a terrible idea, and people will sign up to do the deed. It's catastrophic. I read so many accounts of what happened to prisoners during the Reign of Terror. I mean, Napoleon's first wife, Josephine Bonaparte, was imprisoned at the Carmes prison during the Reign of Terror. At the time, her name was Rose de Beauharnais. Her husband was a French aristocrat. He was beheaded. So what happened to her in jail was catastrophic. She's a survivor. But yes, so Dostoevsky wrote in the aftermath of 1789, but also in the aftermath of 1830, the failed French Revolution that did not end up in the establishment of a republic, but in the establishment of this citizen king, Louis Philippe, who, the coolest guy ever in history. Louis Philippe came to the throne with the revolution of 1830 and left the throne with the revolution of 1848. I mean, that is a great royal record. You are put on the throne as a consequence of a revolution, and you are taken off your throne as a consequence of the revolution. So 1848 was that revolution that Dostoevsky belonged to this revolutionary group called the Petrashevsky Circle, and they read naughty books. They read French utopian socialists, they read Belinsky, they read some of the private correspondence of Russian writers that was banned by the censors because it called for abolition of serfdom, and it spoke out against the authority of the Tsar. So that was the reason why they were arrested, because they were plotting to go beyond reading the books. And then the revolution of 1870, 1871, the Paris Commune, that will happen after the publication of Crime and Punishment, but before the publication of Demons and Brothers Karamazov. So by the time Dostoevsky is writing Demons and Brothers Karamazov, it will be written in the aftermath of the Paris Commune, which is a catastrophic event in French history. Those of you who have been to Paris or plan on going to Paris, please consider going to the Père Lachaise cemetery. That's where all the revolutionaries were shot. They still have a wall at the Père Lachaise cemetery, and there are always flowers placed at that wall. So revolutions in France are very real, and they infuse the writing of Tolstoy. So by the time he's writing Brothers Karamazov and Demons, revolutions in France happened 4 times, and so he understands the ideas that propel people to seek that kind of post-Enlightenment perfection. But the question that he keeps asking, who is going to be the human being who will decide who is the valuable human being to keep in this perfect world where we are going to move into the crystal palace of post-Enlightenment progressive perfection. It's fascinating, all that argument about the crystal palace. So I showed you the covers for Fathers and Sons, which if you have never read Fathers and Sons of Turgenev, can't recommend it enough. It's so short. It's about 130, 140 pages. Completely understandable. After my students read it, they say that they had like the first non-angry conversation with their parents or their grandparents since childhood, because we love to argue with people who are of different political views than us. But then in Fathers and Sons, Turgenev just shows this rift between the 40s liberals and 60s radicals, and to what extent they destroy the structure of human connections. And so that is the greatest accomplishment of Turgenev in Fathers and Sons. The amazing thing is both liberals and conservatives were after him after he published that novel, to the point where they hounded him out of Russia. He had lived most of his life in Baden-Baden and Paris for personal reasons, but also because Fathers and Sons became just the point of such severe contention with critics both on the left and on the right, that he must have done something right in that novel. And then Chernyshevsky, who was imprisoned in the same jail as Dostoevsky in 1849 at the Peter and Paul quarters, he read Fathers and Sons and he said, no, we can write progressive literature that will propel people to make the right choices out of their free will. And so Chernyshevsky has these very positivist, very utilitarian characters who always make the right choices for the entire novel. Some of you who are reading with me, I actually ask you to read What Is to Be Done of Chernyshevsky. Most of you abandoned because it was unreadable. It's a pamphlet, but it's a 400-page pamphlet about characters who are very committed to positivism and utilitarian perfection. Everything has utility in their lives. And in one of the passages in the book, this character's name is Vera Pavlovna, so Chernyshevsky conceals the most revolutionary ideas in her dreams so that it would pass censorship. And she has this dream where everyone lives in the Crystal Palace. And everyone makes positive utilitarian decisions. And I tell my students, this is where it doesn't pass my stink test. Even children enjoy doing their chores in Chernyshevsky's Crystal Palace. That's where I say, like, this is not right. I'm a mother of 3. I know that children do not enjoy doing their chores. And so Chernyshevsky writes this novel, is published. So Fathers and Sons is 1862, Chernyshevsky's homage to the perfection of post-Enlightenment thinking and doing 1863. Dostoevsky reads both of them and says, actually, a human being is more complicated than that. And his Notes from Underground is the response. And it's impossible to love the underground man. I mean, I've had students who tossed the book in the Iowa River because they couldn't stand his mad ravings. But he just goes, but this is me speaking now. And I love my own fat more than I love humanity. And I don't care about anyone else. And I stick my tongue out at the Crystal Palace. And it's amazing. One of the readers actually messaged me and she said, Anna, I'm listening to Notes from Underground while in a self-driving taxi car right now. Am I okay? And I said, as long as you stick your tongue at it, you should be just fine. So that was my comment to this predicament in her life. She's listening to a book about a character who insists on his free will, even if it causes him irreparable harm. And she's just saying, Anna, what am I to do? Stick your tongue at it. So, very good. Because what else can we do? I mean, can we do anything beyond shaking our fist at the Bronze Horseman? No. We are in a perpetual world that is so complex, and we lack all ability to counter it. There's so little we can do against this massive thing that is constantly hurling itself at us. That is sort of the great man of history, the powers that be concept that Dostoevsky is addressing in all of his novels. And he's just saying our humanity is the greatest safeguard against that, which is so counterintuitive, but always right. Any other questions? Well, this was amazing. Wow, look at this. All of you are still awake and everything. This is so stunning. So those of you who want to have all of your morals completely destroyed and eviscerated, stay for Taxi Driver. And those of you who want to preserve your pristine moral higher ground, leave. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.